Good evening, everyone. It's now 2 minutes past 6 o'clock, and I'd like to start the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel, and I'd like to remind members and officers in the chamber and on Teams to only switch on their microphone when invited to speak and switch it off or mute when you've finished speaking. Thank you for that. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Jeffreys and Peter Ward, the business representative. I believe Councillor Piccolo may be running late, or I'm not sure if he'll be here yet.
Thank you, Wendy. Number 2, I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 21st of September 2020 to be approved as a correct record. Are there any other comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Moving swiftly on then. Urgent items of business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. Moving on to declarations of interest. Does anyone with a declaration of interest to declare? Moving on then to the business points of the meeting. We have agenda number 5, economic mitigation list. Anna Eastgate will present this report, and then will be questions from members. Over to you, Anna, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So members will be aware that we have circulated a summary document. So if I just rewind a little bit and give you a little bit of history. On the first page of the executive summary, we set out a list there of identified cost impacts of the LTC scheme. So members will be aware earlier this year, I believe it was, we published the cost of the LTC scheme to Thurrock. I think it was called a lost or missed opportunity, which was a public facing document where we had undertaken a series of studies around the borough, looking at what the impacts of the scheme were and what the costs were. Basically in various categories: business and economy, environmental impact, community impact and growth impacts. The second phase of the work, we've instructed to identify what the maximum benefits could be from the scheme. If you remember, the remit of the task force and the position of the council was always to maximise the benefits and mitigate the impacts as much as possible. So the second phase of the report is identifying which elements of mitigation we could support and bring forward to help basically make the scheme better in Thurrock, whilst we acknowledge that we don't believe it could ever be truly mitigated, because we consider as an authority that the scheme is so significant that couldn't happen. This was identified as an exercise in identifying what mitigation and legacy matters could come forward. So the work that's been undertaken has been led by Hatch, who did the first report. They have been linking in with all of the officers in the council under the various disciplines. We've kind of categorised the mitigation elements into 3. So direct mitigation that we would consider has to be provided. Council-led support, mitigation and legacy packages that we consider would help to mitigate those impacts. And then the legacy, which is obviously that more forward-facing identification of matters that we could seek to negotiate with High Rise England. So the next pages of the summary document really go into what that would entail or could entail. And it's divided into various elements, from construction specific, the design, junctions, traffic management, community and public health, which we know obviously is a big issue for us, local labour and business, looking at the transport network management and development. So that's obviously a big concern in terms of how the scheme is going to impact on our local road network, and then looking at future provision of infrastructure, how the scheme can facilitate that, how it can deliver it, how we can improve our green corridors and our green spaces, think about the heritage and the historic environment, and what legacy benefits could come forward as part of that. And also one thing that we're concerned about is climate change. So the list of elements there, it isn't exhaustive. As I said, it's been developed in conjunction with officers in the council who have been heavily involved in the emerging scheme and the impacts that we believe it's going to have. The document's there for members of the task force to provide some feedback and comment on. I'm happy to receive that verbally, or if members want to drop me an email in the coming days. We're looking to try and get this piece of work finalised before the end of the month, because obviously that's when the DCO document is being, the DCO application is being submitted. And I think I'd just like to draw your attention to the benefits mapping on the back page, which is a really good pictorial identification for how we would look to approach the benefits on the package of measures that are set out in the summary document. Once we've concluded the work, there will be a detailed technical report that will be published, as well as this summary, and we're looking to bring forward a more public-facing, easy-to-read version like we did previously. So I think that's probably as much as I intended to say about the document, but like I say, I'm inviting feedback from members of the task force on what they think about that emerging piece of work and what else they would like us to consider going forward.
Thank you, Anna. And I appreciate it is a changing document and then being worked on all the time. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. So if I start with someone on Teams first. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anna, for that. Obviously, I understand this is sort of a strategy level document, and I know I did already contact you earlier on in the week about the specifics that were highlighted for L15. So I haven't got any page numbers here, but it's L15 under the legacy benefits, the enhanced green space, because obviously I'm in agreement with enhancing key sites, but I was just wondering why the key sites were 2 green spaces in Tilbury, especially the Koala Park, which had quite a lot of money spent on it over the years, and the King George playing field, when Chadwell green areas are have had much less investment in them and are probably areas of much lower quality and in need of investment. So obviously we had a talk about that, and you said it is a strategy level document, but in that case, should we be putting specific sites in here? Can they be taken out, or can they be extended to include sites in Chadwell? Because the route isn't actually even going to really impact Tilbury as much as it's going to impact Chadwell now. So I'm just wondering why the focus on those green spaces, and I just want clarity about whether it's just going to be those green spaces that we're looking to enhance, or whether we're looking wider, borough-wide at other spaces.
Thanks, Councillor Muldowney. Chair, I did actually raise this with Steve Plum, who is the officer who's been advising us on a lot of the ecology and open space work. So he has suggested that, looking at Wickham Fields, he agrees that it definitely should be on the list. And whilst not directly affected, it is one of the closest to the LTC. He said from his memory, he recalls the eastern boundary is relatively open, so there'd be little screening towards the LTC. He's also said that Orsett Heath is quite close as well, and although there shouldn't be any direct visual effects, there will be more noise and air quality issues in that location. And the site has nothing at all on it, as play equipment has been removed years ago. So there could be scope for some tree planting and maybe even the importing of some spoil to help restore the landfill area at the northern part of that site, which is subject to differential settlement. So he is working on that. He's happy to take comments and we can feed that back in. He's also said that the LTC open space assessment, which was done, was proposing compensation land at Blackshots, and we have asked for the full assessment of that so that we can look at what any effects are on other open spaces. So again, it's potentially something that we need to come back to once we've seen the application document and actually what the level of mitigation is that the LTC scheme is physically proposing in response to their application. But certainly I've raised it with Steve, and it's something that we can consider.
Great, thank you. Sorry, that was Steve.
Steve Plum.
Thanks. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Now invite any comments from inside the chamber. Councillor Allen.
Evening, Chamber. Evening, everyone. Anna, straight to the point. I understand that Highways England have already completed their health impact assessment. Is that correct?
Well, certainly the work is advanced. Whether it's complete or not, I don't know, because the last conversation we had was that they were working to finalise their DCO application documents, of which the Health Inequalities Impact Assessment is part.
Right, it's just that I was led to believe that it is complete, and I was going to ask you if you have had a sneak preview of it, and have any idea of how damning that report's going to be.
So, Councillor Allen, we do have another item on the agenda to discuss the health impact assessment. There is a paper that we've produced, but that's not necessarily directly linked, although there are obviously links to the mitigation list. But are we better to answer those questions, Chair, as part of the paper on health impacts, unless there's a question about health impacts linked to this mitigation schedule, Councillor Allen?
It's just that I can see a lot of impact here. We've got business and economy, we've got the environment, and we seem to have some guessing, I'd say, on the with minor to moderate to adverse. Now, who has made these estimations without actually knowing what the overall impact would be? And that's why I referred to the health impact assessment, because someone's sort of pulled these. What can I say? What's the best way to put it? Pulled these moderate and adverse, out of nowhere. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, yeah, I understand where you're going with it, but I can't agree that it's been pulled out of nowhere. So the people that we have commissioned to support this piece of work is a company called Hatch. They have, I think I mentioned it before, they have people that work for them that used to work for the Treasury, who are used to undertaking assessments of major public sector infrastructure schemes and identifying values and impacts on them. The work has been undertaken in close consultation with officers, and our public health team have been very involved in the production of this piece of work. And whilst we've seen a draft of some of the health impact assessment work, don't forget we provided the data to Highways England for that health impact assessment. So we know the basis on which that work has been produced. And so I think we need to give officers involved and Hatch a level of professional credibility for their professional judgment and the work that they have input into it. It's not complete and utter guesswork that's been pulled out of thin air, Councillor Allen.
It's just, Chair, that they've seemed to. I understand that these are professional people, in a sense, but they're still coming to an assumption, and the worst one is health and well-being, moderate to adverse. I think it's going to be quite damning, Anna, the overall health impact assessment. Well,
Actually, Councillor Allen, I don't think it's going to be quite as damning as you think. And I've made these comments before, and they appear to be quite controversial. But what we've talked about in terms of environmental impact assessment is that. So Highways England have undertaken a series of assessments to understand what the environmental impact of this scheme is likely to be. Some of those impacts may give rise to a significant environmental effect, some of them may not. We've talked a lot about one of the hot topics for us as a borough, which is air quality. And what we need to understand in production of all of these technical documents is there is a standard against which the scheme will be measured, and it's only if the scheme is likely to breach those standards that mitigation is required. And I'm afraid, as controversial as this statement is going to be, and I'm waiting for the sharp intakes of breath from members when I say it, but there are not air quality issues everywhere in our borough. And there are not going to be air quality issues everywhere along the route of this road. And whether members like it or not, I'm afraid that's the reality of the situation. Where there are going to be breaches of air quality and where there's ongoing monitoring, then Highways England will have to mitigate that. But they don't, I'm afraid, have to mitigate anything that doesn't give rise to significant environmental effect.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Rice.
Yes, Anna. We're talking about the noise barriers. Can you actually tell us where these will be? Because the letter that Fraser's received from Gareth, the development phase-led Lower Thames crossing facility, is very, it talks about noise, talks about barriers, but nothing specific. Can we have some specifics where they're going to be? These noise barriers?
Chair, we're kind of jumping about a little bit here, I think. Is the question in relation to noise barriers in relation to the mitigation schedule summary document that we're talking about now, or when we deal with the subject of noise barriers separately?
Well,
because we seem to be now talking about correspondence that we were going to come on to under any other business.
Well, you know, we can talk about it there or now, but at the end of the day, we want to know, Anna, as a committee, where these noise barriers are. You know, it's all right making a general statement, but we don't know. We're none the wiser. We don't know where they are.
Councillor Rice, Highways England attended the task force last month and they actually put plans up showing the locations of the noise barriers. They also talked about the heights of them and the lengths of them. The noise barriers are detailed in the latest design refinements consultation booklet, which is still available, and I can email the link to you if you still need it so that you can see where it is. I think, you know, I'm sure you were at the last task force, so I'm not entirely clear what additional information you're asking me to provide.
Well, that would be useful, but, you know, what the public really want to understand through these meetings is where they're going to be, how they're going to be policed, and how valuable they're going to be. That's what they really want to understand. Okay,
so we've asked, well, coming on to any other business now, Councillor Massey, but we have received the response from Gareth Prothero. We have drafted a further response to him because there were some elements in that letter that we didn't feel were responded adequately. And Chris Stratford, who you'll be aware has now joined our team, is going to run through those elements under AOB. So I won't go into the detail now, but I think we've asked for the slides from the presentation last month that Highways England gave. Those slides provide information about the noise barriers, which replicates the information that's in the design refinements consultation booklet. You know, like I said, I can circulate a link to that design refinements online booklet if that's what you want, pending the arrival of the slide deck. But the information is there, Councillor Rice. The only thing that isn't there, which we did ask for, was some ideas of what it was actually going to look like. And if you remember, at the task force last month, Gareth Prothero said that the design of the noise barriers wouldn't be determined until the principal works contractor was on board, and at that point it would be looked at. So it's too early in the process to be talking about materials for those noise barriers. And in actual fact, one of the responses to the letter that we are seeking is a justification for why the Highways England are pursuing reflective noise barriers rather than absorptive ones.
Well, the link would be useful, Anna.
Sure, I'll circulate the link.
Thank you, everyone. If we can stick to economic mitigation for this agenda item, please. We do have a whole other agenda item for health impact. and we are going to have some time after the work programme to go through any other business. One question I've got, Anna, that springs to mind, on page 2, reference M5, alter construction hours to reduce noise and disruption in residential areas. I notice it's high priority as well. How much power or sway of a council have we got to actually alter those construction hours?
I'm on mute, sorry. In terms of one of the things that we can influence, actually, that forms part of the I can never remember what it is, Code of Construction and Management Practice, COCP, which is a document that will be scrutinised under the examination process and will be secured through a requirement. If you remember, a requirement is the equivalent of a planning condition. On a consent, we've still got that concern that Highways England use the Department for Transport to discharge their requirements, but actually I anticipate the hours of working to be a hotly debated topic as part of the examination process, and certainly something that local residents should have at the top of their list to submit in terms of their written representations, because, as I've said before, the construction impacts of this road are going to be far worse for the 6 years that this road is under construction than the actual operation of it.
Thank you, Anna. If I could just, actually, I'll come back later. I'll see if there's any other questions in the chamber first or comments and online. Councillor Muldowney.
Oh, mute. You're on mute, Councillor Muldowney. We can't hear you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anna. I mean, looking at it overall as a strategy document, I did think that it was a good document which did capture. I couldn't think of any missing areas anyway, except perhaps bridleways. I think they're probably captured under one of the elements. And that's probably going down into a bit more detail than was needed in this document. One thing I did want to ask, just for my own clarification, and that was in regards to the council-led support. So it's divided into direct mitigation, council-led support, and legacy. Is this, who would be providing the resource for the council to provide the council-led support? Is that going to have to come out of the council's own resource, or will Highways England actually be contributing the cost of that?
So what we would expect on that is that we would expect the promoter Highways England to provide a fund, actually either under a Section 106 agreement or some other mechanism, to fund the posts for that. Obviously, you know, one of the few impacts or benefits that this scheme has potentially for us, especially with the current climate, with COVID-19 and the impacts on our local economy, never mind the national economy. You know, as a borough, we would want to harness the maximum in terms of jobs and opportunities for our local residents, you know, to be employed and to benefit from the scheme. So one of the ideas would be that the council would lead that, because we want to be front and centre of making sure that we get the lion's share of that support for our community. And the same really applies for the public health elements as well. We know our communities best, and we think we're best placed to lead that work. We just need the funding to do that.
Okay. And sorry, if I can I ask a second question? So my second question would be, I suppose, really how us as members or us as a task force are going to feed into this process once the DCO is accepted and we're into this hectic period. Sorry about the noise in the background. We're into this hectic period where officers are going to be under a lot of pressure to deal with the application process. You know, how are we going to have an input into that? For example, when the detail of which areas are designated as key sites, you know, when we're digging down into that detail, and how is our developments going to be reported back to us have we got any idea about that yet?
So I know members thought it was a little controversial when there was a paper considered at General Services Committee for the abolition of the task force, but one of the ideas to replace the task force was task and finish groups. And the idea behind that was that there would be, you know, a few people involved in each work stream that we could liaise with more readily and easily rather than waiting for monthly meetings. And then that element would be worked on, recommendations provided, and then feedback in through another form, either General Services Committee or through the task force. Obviously, the task force doesn't necessarily have any decision-making powers to bind the council, which is an issue. General Services Committee is the relevant remit for making decisions about the Lower Thames crossing. So there's some work to be done there, Councillor Muldowney, to be honest. I don't quite know how it's going to work, but what I can say to you is that it's unlikely we will get everybody on the task force to agree to everything. And we need to have consideration about how we're going to make decisions going forward and just how that is going to work. But I suspect the easiest way to do it will be through task and finish groups.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shinnick.
Yeah, I wondered if there's anything going to be written in regarding HGV lorries being parked up while all this is going on, because it is a big problem in the area it stands.
Okay, so lorries, movements and parking of vehicles isn't necessarily something that's in the remit of this document, because there won't be lorries directly attributed to the scheme. Highways England has to provide a transport strategy for how they're going to move materials to site. That may include the road network, but it also may include things like use of the port. I know that they've got a jetty that they're supposed to be applying for consent for to bring bulky, large materials in through, so to reduce the impact on the network. So it's a bit difficult because the issue with lorries in our borough is wider, is a much wider issue. It's not as a consequence of the scheme. And I would suspect that as part of the emerging local plan, there will be an HGV assessment undertaken to identify what additional vehicle parking and lorry parking is required in the borough to accommodate, you know, the need and the growing need, clearly, because the ports are expanding, both within our borough and the surrounding areas. So I'm afraid, Councillor Shinnick, I don't think it's something that will fall within the remit of this work for the LTC.
Okay.
Thank you. Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Anna, obviously, you and I have discussed the fact that as an action group, we're likely to be going in slightly different directions with things like this mitigation. I do have some points that I'm going to email you about. Apologies, I didn't do it sooner. I've been wiped out with a migraine all weekend. But one thing I'd just like to know is how much of this list is actually likely to become reality and how much of it is more of a wish list? Because some of the things I've seen on there don't seem to be things that I would have thought were that realistic.
So this is supposed to be a little bit more of an extensive list that sets out things that we can achieve and things that would be desirable. So it's up to us as a council to decide, you know, how we're going to prioritise those things that we're going to ask. Do I think that Highways England are just going to give us everything on this list? No, they're not. And if they are going to give us stuff on this list, they're going to want something in return. And that's not for us to go into this examination completely opposed to it. There is going to need to be a level of mitigation and negotiation. You know, the council may need to reconsider its strategy in that, because quite frankly, if I was Highways England with the stance that the council's taking at the minute, I probably would only give the bare minimum that I need to, which would be the mitigation required under the environmental impact assessment. So that's a matter for members to debate and discuss, and let's see what happens.
Okay, it was just things like L18 with the incentives for low emission vehicles using the LTC. That question was actually raised by Gareth Johnson recently, and he asked whether the same could happen at the Dartford tolls. And the Undersecretary made it perfectly clear that because of the fact that it doesn't help congestion, there's no way that they would be considering that at the Dartford tunnel. So that kind of brought to my attention the fact of, well, how much else on this list are things that we've got no chance of getting, considering it's meant to be mitigation.
But it's a question of what you're asking for, Laura, isn't it, and how you ask for it. So if Highways England are saying that in the opening year, air quality and emissions are going to be at their worst, which is in 2027, 2028, and then it's going to get better than that. Make Highways England put their money where their mouth is in terms of that emission control. And if they don't meet the emission targets that they set for themselves, then they have to put money into an escrow account for Thurrock Council to use for environmental improvements and benefits in the vicinity of the crossing where there are potentially air quality impacts or results from the scheme. So it's not necessarily telling Highways England only low emission vehicles can use the crossing. It's about what the ask is, and it can be more subtle than that.
Okay. And could I also ask about the accommodation for workers in the Stamford-le-Hope area? If that was in as much work accommodation, does that not have to fall within the development boundary or be consulted upon in any way?
Necessarily. Highways England can apply for other things under normal Town and Country Planning Act processes. Not everything has to be included in the development consent order.
And it would actually be physical houses in the traditional sense rather than accommodation as...
We haven't had that conversation, so that level of detail isn't available at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
We're coming up for nearly 30 minutes on this item, so I'm just going to start wrapping things up on it. A question I've got, Anna, on page was it L13, the Two Forts Way project, and L16, the Coalhouse Fort East Tilbury Natural and Cultural Heritage Area project. Items close to my heart, and I just wonder if there's a long way to go on this process still. So in relation to those two projects, are they effectively going to be waiting for what Highways England could do for us, or do you know if they're getting moved along despite this report that you brought tonight?
Okay, so the Two Forts Way has always been a priority for the council since way back whenever. We're obviously aware that there's been some issues down there with breaches of the seawall that need to be rectified. Highways England are obviously moving significant amounts of spoil around that locality. They've also demonstrated a commitment to improving non-motorised user routes. We consider that the Two Forts Way is quite a significant route that could provide significant benefits for the community, both in terms of visiting both forts, but also having that coastal route open and available for people to use, as pastimes, walking dogs, cycling, whatever it is they may want to do. With regard to Coalhouse Fort, obviously, with my new hat on and the expanded responsibilities I've got, Coalhouse Fort sits within the place delivery team. There is somebody looking at that. There is anticipated to be a paper going to Cabinet at some point, setting out options for Coalhouse. So I'm afraid I'm not up to speed with where we're at with that, but certainly looking at ways to improve the future and secure the future of that site is something that the council does need to consider. And if there is something that can come forward, working in partnership with other organisations such as Historic England, Highways England, and various other organisations, then that should be explored.
Brilliant, thank you. Has anyone got any final questions? None in the chamber? None on Teams? Brilliant, thank you very much, Anna. I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. So this is the Health Impact Assessment Update. Again, it's Anna Eastgate to present. Over to you, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So apologies from colleagues in the health team, which I'm sure you can understand are incredibly busy at the moment and are working hard helping our community with the pandemic. So apologies from the team for not being able to be present this evening, but our consultant Stantec, who have been working closely with our public health team, produced this paper for us, setting out the background of where we've come from and where we are currently with Highways England in relation to the health impact and equalities assessment. So members will be aware that the public health team have been front and centre and heavily involved in our responses to all three consultations. That was the statutory consultation, the supplementary consultation earlier this year that closed in April, and also the more recent design refinements consultation. The Health and Equalities Impact Assessment is a submission document for the development consent order, so we won't get to see the final document until the application has been accepted. We made a case collectively with other public health authorities to request an early draft of the health impact assessment. Highways England did share that with us on the 3rd of August, but at that time it was very difficult for officers to provide any detailed comments in the timescales that were made available to us. I think it's fair to say that officers still have concerns about the ability to provide meaningful comments given the ongoing pandemic situation, and we wrote to Highways England setting out those concerns. However, we have provided some comments back to Highways England, and we have had some discussions with the team in relation to that. We, again, like I said, we won't get to see the final version until the DCO is submitted and accepted. But just to recap on where we've come in this journey, Highways England set up the Communities Impact and Public Health Advisory Group that was chaired by an independent professor. It was called SIPHAG, is the abbreviation of it. 9 meetings were held since November 2018 to the current time. In section 3.1 of that paper, we set out what our key concerns were to each round of consultation, and perhaps quite consistently, some of the points are repeated, community severance, impacts on health, air quality, noise, all of those sorts of issues, also impacts on the traveller site. And then those elements were repeated pretty much in the design refinements consultation. I think, to summarise, the health impact and equalities assessment really for us lacks recommendations that prevent or mitigate the negative impacts of the scheme sufficiently, and doesn't really go far enough from officers' perspective to maximise the benefits or provide any positive impacts from the scheme. Obviously, we can't provide any further detailed comments until we actually see the final version of the health impact and equalities assessment. But I think it's important to note that all of the public health authorities surrounding us and involved in this scheme with us share those concerns in relation to that piece of work. But like I said, until we actually see the document, it's going to be very difficult for us to provide any further substantive comments at this time.
Thank you. To start with a question from myself. So, health impact assessment. In terms of, you've got the experience in this, Anna, and I'm sure Chris as well, with DCOs and things like that. Oh.
Sorry.
Is it quite normal to not have the health impact assessment made public before the submission of a DCO, in your experience?
Okay, so first and foremost, let's remind everybody that you don't have to produce a health impact and equalities assessment as a standalone document. It's normally a schedule or a section within the environmental impact assessment. So if you remember way back, gosh, it predates my arrival at Thurrock, but if you remember, the council campaigned quite significantly to try and get a standalone health and equalities impact assessment, which Highways England reluctantly then agreed to provide. So that was quite a victory, should we say, in itself. Not that a scheme of this scale and impact shouldn't have a standalone health impact and equalities assessment, because of course we believe that it should, but unfortunately that's not necessarily the law of the land. Where health impact assessments are provided, it would be normal for the outputs of that health impact assessment to feed into the environmental mitigation, but in this instance, obviously a constrained programme, it's going to be a little bit harder for Highways England to do that. So again, it's a watch this space, because we need to have a look when we see the environmental impact assessment, when it's published and how that's been reported, and we see the health impact assessment. They are going to be two key documents that our team are going to be focusing on doing a review and identifying where the gaps are and seeking, ways that can be remedied. But it's difficult for me to say, but I do feel that a lot of this work has been rushed, and I think our officers feel that it's been rushed, and with the benefit of more time, then perhaps something more significant and beneficial could have been produced.
Thank you for that. And just to make sure I've got this correct as well, the two documents we were just referring to, so after, say, DCO goes in on the 23rd of October, is it then 28 days before it's accepted and those documents then made public?
Okay, so this was a point I was going to make in AOB again, but I can make the point here. So yes, that's normally the process, but it is open to the applicant to publish documentation earlier. As a consequence of that, there was 5 authorities, all host authorities: Kent, Gravesham, Thurrock, Essex and Havering. We wrote a joint letter to Highways England and the Planning Inspectorate, asking for early release and early sight of the document so that all the councils have got the opportunity to review the documentation at the earliest possible juncture. You know, this application is going to be between 50 and 60,000 pages. And given everything else that's going on in our borough and a pandemic, we need as much time as possible to be able to review that documentation adequately to best represent the council's case.
Brilliant, thanks, Anna. I'm going to go to Thames. Is Councillor Rice? I'm not sure if he's... Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. I've remembered to unmute myself this time. Thank you, Anna. I mean, well, I do think it was quite an achievement to get Highways England to actually do a health inequalities impact assessment as a standalone document. But I mean, how much this has actually benefited us so far in the process, it seems very little. I mean, I'm just astounded that the Communities Impact and Health Assessment Group was set up in November 2018, and yet they still haven't been provided with enough baseline data to be able to agree the baseline conditions upon which the health equalities and equalities impact assessment is based. I mean, it's just unbelievable, really. So it's quite frustrating. I was excited that this item was actually going to be on the agenda, but I should have known better, really. I mean, reading through, it's obvious that our team has been working hard and doing what they should be doing, but it's the same things that they're requesting. The statutory consultation, all 3 consultations, it's the same things that we're requesting. And although we have now had a draft copy which has been given ahead of time, which is good, from reading this summary here, it doesn't seem as if there's any information in there that's of any use, really. So I don't know, is there something in there that's useful, Anna?
I think the team shares your concerns, Councillor Muldowney, and we've got significant concerns that we have been asked at a very late stage to provide detailed field feedback on significant documentation that are going to form part of the DCO application documents. You know, we've been still providing feedback on documents, you know, even up to now, we're still reviewing some documents that have been sent through to us. So it all feels very late in the day. You know, had Highways England spread their programme out a little bit more and had a little bit more of a planned process for sharing documents, then perhaps the feedback and the engagement could have been more meaningful. But my concern, which is the concern shared by other neighbouring authorities, host authorities as well, is that it's all a little bit too much too late, frankly.
Yeah, oh well, we still await the detail of the health inequality. I'm not sure what else to say about it. I mean, everything here is, we're still waiting for the data to be provided. But even there's not enough data to actually agree that the baseline data they've used for the impact assessment is something that we can agree on. It just says it all, really.
We've had other issues with baseline data in other areas as well, not least the historic environment, where we couldn't agree various elements of the baseline assessments with the Highways England team, and some of those elements remain outstanding even now. So that's a bit of a consistent theme, if you like, across the board, frankly.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. Anyway, I hope that you're successful in getting early release of the document.
So do we, although you've got to be careful what you wish for, haven't you?
Councillor Allen in the chamber.
In regards to the baseline assessments, whatever they'll be, whether it's health or are they all independently undertaken? And is there not any bias at all in the way that they're looked at, Anna?
So Highways England have got a
Anna, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Highways England have got a consortium of consultants under the name of Cascade that they use for preparation of all of their technical work. And that's across the board, from the engineering and design elements right through to the production of the environmental impact assessment. There are certain rules and regulations, obviously, that govern how it's supposed to be produced and how it's approached. And there are British standards that have to be conformed with in the production of that documentation. I suppose there perhaps could have been earlier engagement with the council in agreeing some of the baseline approaches and to the scheme. I mean, let's not forget that the council's position is that this project should have potentially been rescoped anyway from an environmental impact assessment basis, simply because the red line boundary kind of doubled in size, if you remember, in July 2018, I think it was. Obviously, one of the key bits of work that the team will be doing is looking through that scoping opinion and identifying those areas that have been complied with and potentially those areas that haven't. So that's an area of weakness for Highways England if they haven't complied with all of that from an environmental perspective. But until we get the documents, it's very difficult for us to say or comment on.
Thank you. I don't think anyone else has got any other questions, unless we've missed anyone. I think it's been said by members. A lot of it is, like Councillor Muldowney said, we're asking for the same information over and over again, and we're going through each consultation and still not having the relevant facts and numbers to make a lot of key decisions. And when that's around it's the borough's health, is something I think we all should take on board as councillors and other members of Thurrock. Just a quick last check, see if anyone else got any other comments, questions on this agenda item before we move on. And Luke as well. Councillor Muldowney.
I think Councillor Spillman's hand's already up, and as I've already asked, do you want to go to him first? Oh, he's gone now.
We'll try Councillor Spillman first and see if he's still there.
To be honest, Chair, I was too quick with my hand because I wanted to speak on the work programme. So please go ahead with Councillor Muldowney.
Over to you, Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Spillman. I just wanted to clarify, and forgive me because I think you may have answered this question sort of on a different point at the last meeting, but about particulate matter 2.5 specifically, because it was some feedback from one of the consultations. I think it was a supplementary consultation. Yeah, it was a supplementary consultation about whether any consideration has been given to assessing the key pollutants PM 2.5 with known health effects. But then that doesn't travel through to the design refinement consultation. That was the one point I just wanted to clarify. I don't know if you're able to do that, Anna.
I'll have to take that one away, Councillor Muldowney, but one thing I will say is that there have been a series of issues workshops where we have been working through. We had about 700 issues outstanding with Highways England across a whole spectrum of issues and topics, and one of which won't surprise you as air quality. Our officers have been involved in discussions about the modelling that they have done on air quality and pollutants. One of the things that is of concern to us, and it also is of concern to Gravesham, so we're on the same page on this, is about the ongoing maintenance and monitoring of any particulates or pollution and air quality issues in the borough, because based on the modelling that Highways of England are doing, they're not showing any breaches of the regulations and the guidance in relation to the levels of pollution in the borough once the road is open. And obviously that is something that if their modelling is accurate, then that's great. But if their modelling isn't accurate when the road is open, how does Thurrock get a second bite of the cherry to make sure that we can protect our residents and require additional mitigation? So it's something that's very much on our radar. But I'm not technically minded as far as pollutants and air quality are concerned, but I do know that our team are discussing it at length with Highways England. And as I say, one of the issues is about that ongoing monitoring once the road is open, so that Highways England's modelling can be put to proof, if you like. I'm just going to ask Chris Stratford, who I know many of you know as being over on the dark side, shall we say, working for Highways England, but within the last few weeks has come to work for us. And I'm delighted because he's provided a huge amount of support for us in bringing things forward. So Chris is a little bit more technical than I am because he's a town planner. So I'm going to ask if Chris has got anything he wants to add to that.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, just a small thing. I mean, I'm not an air quality specialist, so please let me excuse myself first. But the point that you raise, Councillor Muldowney, which, as you rightly say, was raised in our comments on supplementary consultation, and in fact, it's top of page 3 on that summary report that you've got in front of you. We have today, funnily enough, submitted comments on the 12, the environmental statement chapters. And one of the comments we've made is about the lack of information on PM 2.5, which, just for anyone's benefit, is a much finer particulate material than PM 10, for instance. And therefore, potentially it's got some health issues connected with it. Now, my understanding of Highways England's current stance is that they're doing 2.5, but within their assessment of PM 10 rather than on its own. Now, I don't honestly understand what that really means and what the difference is, but nevertheless, we've still raised this as an issue that we are still concerned about. So it's still live from our point of view.
Thank you.
Question from Councillor Allen in the chamber.
Thank you, Chair. Again, with reference to PMs, particulate matter, as you've stated, 2.5s and PM10s. I do understand the differences between, obviously, petrol, unleaded fuel, I believe, being 2.5, and the heavier oil being diesel particulate matter, PM10s. I could be wrong. Again, I'm not an expert in this field. But I do understand that it's measured in parts per million in the air. And I do believe that anything up to 40 parts per million is deemed, anything over 40 parts per million is deemed as dangerous levels. And I do believe that our borough has exceeded that limit quite often. And we've had dense particulate matter up to 56 parts per million. So that would be deemed as quite dangerous, and that's prior to us receiving the Lower Thames crossing. So we've already exceeded dangerous limits, and we've not even had the delivery of this motorway yet.
Yeah, I mean, I can respond to that. Yes, there have been breaches of air quality in various locations in our borough, but it's not all of the time, and it's not every single day. And that's where the value of securing ongoing monitoring comes in, so that we can put Highways England to proof in terms of their modelling.
Nothing to come back on that. Thank you, Chair.
I think that's. I don't think anyone has got any more questions or comments. I can't see any hands up on Teams or in the chamber. So, nearly coming up for 7 o'clock. We'll move on and move on to the work programme. This is on the agenda on pages 13 and 14. Does any member have any further items that like to be added or make any comments? Councillor Spillman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a wild bee in my bonnet, and it's all about biodiversity. Now, given that the Prime Minister has made significant commitments recently regarding biodiversity and has said that we have to act immediately, there can't be any dither. You know, we've got to, and set goals for 2030. Isn't this like a really good time to make sure that we get something significant out of this project in terms of biodiversity?
Ella, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can do. So, Councillor Spillman, you might be aware of the Environment Bill that's been delayed a little bit because of the COVID pandemic, but certainly was being debated last year. One of the elements of the Environment Bill is about biodiversity net gain in planning. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to the Planning Act 2008. So on that basis, the DCO regime does not have to comply with those components of the Environment Bill or the Environment Act when it comes in the same way that ordinary Town and Country Planning Act applications would do. This is something that I expressed concern about a while ago. I don't know whether the council provided any consultation response on the Environment Bill. I'm pretty sure they would have done. But biodiversity is something that is important to us, and it's something that we use Steve Plum, the officer that I referred to before, who sweeps everything up really from ecology through to green spaces and green corridors, and is heavily involved in our local plan work. So it's certainly something that I'm happy to take away, and maybe we can bring a paper back on opportunities for biodiversity net gain from the scheme at a future meeting, if you want to put that on there.
Yes, please. Although it's not in the Act, it's definitely on the agenda.
It's that moral responsibility, isn't it? That's the point that you're making.
But we could get some pressure placed from above to act in a certain way, because it's part of his agenda, and this would be, a good way. They've got a blank canvas to work on, essentially, government through this strip, because they're going to be tearing so much of it up. So it would be good if we could put the right pressure on the right people. So I'd really appreciate a report on that. It'd be brilliant.
Okay, so it's something that I'm probably going to ask Chris Stratford to lead on for us, and he can coordinate the consultancy team to produce a paper on what those opportunities might be.
Many thanks.
Thank you. I would support that as well. I think that's a really good thing to have on the work programme going forward. Has anyone else got any other comments? Councillor Muldowney.
You can always rely on me, Chair. Yes, I just following on from what we were discussing with Anna about the future of the task force. I don't know about other members, but I feel like slightly in limbo. I'm not quite sure about whether the task force is going to continue under its present way, its present form, or what's going to happen. And obviously, we are heading now into this time frame where there's going to be a lot of pressure on council officers. So I would like to see, or perhaps the chair can make some investigations about, is the LTC going to be continuing? I mean, the Conservative members of the group just well, I mean, they're never good attenders, but they seem to have deserted the group entirely.
Hey,
From Councillor Spillman, who, in my mind, I don't quite see as a Conservative yet still, and that is a compliment. I just think that, you know, I think probably that it needs to go on the work programme, that we actually figure out how we're going to work moving forward.
I think that's probably a good suggestion, Councillor Muldowney. Maybe we can have a separate conversation with the chair about ideas, and maybe what we need to do is come back with an options paper of how we see it could work going forward. Would that be something that you'd be interested to see?
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you for that. That sounds like a good suggestion going forward. I will be taking a report to Cabinet in the future as well. So based on that, we'll put our heads together as well and see what we can come up with and talk about the future of the task force.
Councillor Massey, I've forgotten that paper deadline was probably looming. That's another one to add to my list of things to do.
Yep, another one to add to the list, I'm afraid, Anna. I just wanted to invite comments as well on the suggestion that if the DCO does become a thing in October, that we don't hold a minuted meeting of the task force meeting in November. Has anyone got any comments on that? Anyone to support that?
Yeah, I'll support that. Yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you. I think the officers, if the DCO does go in, are going to be very, very busy, and especially in the team. So, yes, we won't hold a minuted formal meeting in November.
If it can help, then depending on how we go, it may be an opportunity to hold an informal discussion, or we might be able to circulate a paper of information and key dates and things like that. I'm quite happy to keep members up to date and informed in a way that's easy and quick, if that makes sense, so that it doesn't detract from the main job that we've got in hand. So more than happy to provide support to members. And like I said, maybe once the application goes in and we know it's gone in on the day, then that'll help us produce a kind of diary of key dates that we can maybe circulate.
That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. I know you're going to be under a lot of pressure, so sorry to add to the list, but if you could put that one on, please, that would be fantastic. Going to move now to any other business.
So, Chair, the only thing that we wanted to bring up in AOB was the letter. So task force members will recall the presentation that Highways England made last time, and we the chair wrote a letter to Highways England, to Gareth Prothero, requesting a response to those elements. And I know that we circulated that letter, so members should have all seen it. We chased Highways England last week for a response because we were keen to have a response before the meeting this evening. The letter turned up on Friday. We haven't received a response to all the points that we raised in that letter. And I'm just going to invite Chris Stratford to say a few words, because we're proposing a further response needs to go back to LTC from you, Chair, outlining the remaining issues with which we're concerned. So if it's OK with you, I'll just hand over to Chris to give you a high level outline of what we think that letter should contain.
OK, in the original letter that we sent on the 23rd of September, we asked, well, we made a number of points, but there were actually 19 questions that we asked. And in the response that we received on Friday, in my view, there were 6 questions that we hadn't got a satisfactory response to, and 1 request for the slides that Gareth produced, which also wasn't dealt with. So we've drafted a response, just quickly going through the 6 items. Firstly, it's a reminder that they still haven't answered the question about giving us early sight of the consultation report and any other DCO documents in advance of DCO. And they do say that they're going to reply to us separately on that. So we just wanted to remind them. The one that Anna mentioned earlier about the technical justification for reflective noise barriers being used rather than absorptive, and trying to understand the actual technical performance specification. In other words, how much noise does that barrier reduce? We haven't got answers to that. We also asked, and I noticed from the biodiversity discussion that Councillor Spillman had, we've actually asked them to confirm their current score. There is actually a method of scoring biodiversity, which is set by government, and actually it does come at, the project comes out fairly positive, but we're trying to get that tied down. The difference is that in that calculation, you don't count any destruction of biodiversity that the project itself creates. So it's a bit of a false positive in a sense. Anyway, we've asked them more questions about that.
Chris, just on that point, sorry for interrupting, but I wonder whether it'd be interesting to ask them for the split between north and south of the river, because I expect there's a lot more biodiversity gained south of the river than there is north. Just
yeah, we could do. I don't know whether they got that information, but yes, we could. I mean, they do say that further technical work is still ongoing to establish this biodiversity net gain achievement. And we've questioned that because, well, they're 10 days away from submission. Why are they still working on technical matters when they should be dealing with editing and proofreading? Anyway, the fourth one is about a travel plan. Now, they've said that the travel plan will be produced by their main works contractor, and it will be done in accordance with the guidance, and the Secretary of State will approve it with local authority consultation. All fine and dandy, but what kind of targets are they trying to achieve with sustainable transport? And they do not set that out. So I've sort of set out, could you please tell us how you're going to commit to certain targets and where is that commitment? And then the fifth one is about scheme benefits. They say that there are a number of scheme benefits, and we've asked, well, where are they specified? And again, we haven't actually got an answer to that one. And then the final one was, we've asked for a copy of the closed meeting of the Design Council held back in June, and any comments that the Design Council and CABE have made in respect to the scheme, because we haven't got either of those yet. Plus, we've asked for the slides. So that's the draft that you've got in front of you, Councillor Massey. I can certainly add something about the north-south split on the biodiversity, but otherwise it's there.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Anna. Has any members got any comments to make regarding this and the response that's going back to Highways England? Laura Blake, online.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from that letter, can I also point out that Gareth promised that he'd get back to my question about the false cutting and how in map book 3 I couldn't actually identify where it had been removed, because all mentions of it were identical in map books between the two last consultations. He said he'd get back to me, and to date he hasn't. So would you mind including that in the letter, or if someone could give me his direct email so that I can follow up and chase him myself, please?
I think we could bring that in with potential design changes and consultation feedback, maybe ask that question to see why you haven't got that information, Laura. Try and get that included in a response.
Okay, I'll ask Chris to put a line in about that in the letter, but it will probably wing its way through to you, Councillor Massey, tomorrow to sign off, if that's okay, and then I can get Cara to issue it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And I've got a question or a comment from Councillor Allen, and then afterwards it'll go real quick.
Chair, can I just ask, and Anna and Chris, is the design of this development not set, or will it be tweaked as they go along? Will it be changed as they go along, or is it not set in stone as yet?
No, once the application is submitted, it is very difficult for matters of substance to be changed. So one of the things, for example, that would be very difficult to change would be an increase in the red line boundary because of the consultation and notification requirements that are required. There's very limited stuff that can be influenced once the DCO application is submitted. And that was my concern, actually, at the last task force meeting, because I felt that Gareth was raising expectations that matters such as route alignment we're still open to change. When at this late stage, I would suspect that that is most definitely not the case. So really, the only matters available for influence are certain elements of the drafting of the Development Consent Order itself, which is a piece of secondary legislation, the Code of Construction and Management Practice, so things like the hours of operation, the construction routes potentially might be influenced. We might be able to secure additional mitigation measures in terms of impacts on our local road, the requirements list, the protective provisions. So for members that don't know, protective provisions are items in a development consent order that benefit people like local authorities or statutory undertakers in terms of certain protections that need to be in place in the construction of the scheme and operation of it. So the opportunity to influence is much reduced and much diminished, and members need to be mindful of that, because I do feel that Highways England give an expectation that there is still a lot up for grabs once the DCO application is submitted, and quite frankly, I don't agree with that.
Thank you, Anna. Robert Quick.
Thank you, Chair. Getting to a couple of points where they did respond to the letter, but not satisfactory. First point is about the noise during construction. They share what it's being monitored against without explaining what that relates to. It makes no sense to me at all. Obviously, someone with technical knowledge might understand that better, but I think that needs to be better understood so that we can share with the residents. And it also says that it is not intended to undertake any form of physical noise monitoring during the operational phase. Well, surely they need to measure it during that phase initially to know whether they've met whatever this target is that they've set as a target.
Chair, that comes back to the point that I made about air quality. So any modelling assessments that have been done relating to noise or air quality, it's the council's position and Gravesham's position for that matter, that ongoing monitoring should be provided to check that the modelling exercises that Highways England have undertaken is accurate. You know, by the time this road opens in 2028, with our emerging local plan, you know, and you know, new homes, new jobs, expansion of our ports, the world in Thurrock will change quite dramatically. So there is a need for us to understand whether the modelling that Highways England has undertaken does actually play out to be accurate. So it's one of those things that we have a note of. It's one of those things that we will be seeking, and we'll be in good company because, you know, the other host authority is on the same page as us.
On a similar vein, the comments about the barriers and what they'd be specified to, I mean, they're just quoting a number which means nothing to me. I don't know how we can tell whether they're actually putting in or intend to put in place these barriers that will actually do the job that's needed.
So, and this comes back to the point I've made to Highways England as well, which is that they need to identify the way that they can interpret all of that information in a way that our residents and our community can understand. So that's going to be a consistent theme that we feed back to Highways England, as we have done to date. It will be something that we continue to feed back. Every technical meeting I attend, when they explain all of these things, I say to them, right, well, that's all fine. And if our environmental health team are happy with what you're presenting, that's all great. But actually, you need to find out a way to communicate that to residents in a way that they can understand too, because it is very technical and it is very complex. So that's something that potentially should form part of your written representations, that you need this element of explaining in a way that is readily understood for laymen, really.
Councillor Allen in the chamber.
Can I just ask, in terms of trees, which we all know are natural filters of such gases, what will Highways England be prepared in terms of hectares of forestry to come along with this scheme? Have we got any ideas of what they'll be providing in terms of trees, please?
No, because we haven't seen the detail yet. So no, we'll see that when we get the application. We've got absolutely no idea what they're going to do.
Could we possibly ask that as a specific question to them, please?
We can ask, but they're not going to give it to us because they're going to say it forms part of the development consent order application documents, and you'll see it when it's published. But we can ask.
Hello,
Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, I was just going to add, in our comments on the COCP and the REAC, which is the Register of Environmental Commitments, we have asked that very question. So it's part of our technical comments that they've already received.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks for confirming that. Over to Councillor Shinnick.
This is a question for Hannah. Residents have been receiving letters. Could you explain to me what does it mean when it says your land is of interest when told previously before it wasn't, and why a resident needs a solicitor for their house as it's in line with the development, sorry.
No, Councillor Shinnick, I'm aware of these letters because I think that one of our own councillors has received correspondence, and that particular case is quite unique because and I have responded to the relevant councillor with the information. So if I'm right on this, because it was raised earlier, their property is not within the red line boundary itself, so it's not subject to compulsory acquisition. It is impacted potentially because it's within a certain distance of that red line boundary. But the issue in question for that particular resident and property is that it formed part of a larger parcel of land that was originally owned by the council. And over time, the properties have been sold off, but there is still an element of the land that has restrictive covenants affecting the individual parcels that have been subsequently sold off. And so because the red line or the scheme impacts on the wider site, not necessarily the individual property, they have to be notified because of the restrictive covenants. So it's a procedural and legal point more than anything else. But the issue is that Highways England have to advise people to seek independent advice because the rights affecting the wider parcel of land rather than the individual parcel of land are related to compulsory acquisition rights. And that's the complexity with regard to that particular individual. But having said that, I acknowledge that some of the letters that Highways England have sent have not been particularly explanatory, sympathetic, or necessarily written in a way that residents can readily understand, and have in certain instances incited fear and panic, I think it's fair to say, based on the feedback that I've received. We do feedback to Highways England about the letters and about them being written. We did ask for copies of those letters to be provided to officers in advance before they're sent to residents so that we can understand them. And then if we get inquiries in through councillors, we can provide the explanation. Unfortunately, that is not happening. So unfortunately, residents get these letters and officers are relatively unsighted on them.
Yeah, I think we need to get it across to Highways England that this is really impacting on residents and causing them a lot of distress, you know, where if they explained it a bit more, they'd be quite happy with it, you know.
Yeah, and I think the problem is as well is that when the inquiries process for the LTC team and for Highways England isn't particularly responsive. So if I received a letter like that and didn't understand it, and had to wait 15 days for somebody to call me back, I think I'd have a few sleepless nights as well, frankly.
Well, apparently people have not been getting called back either.
No.
Thank you for that. While we're talking about letters, and there's a good chance that next time we formally meet, the DCO would have been submitted. Is it a good time to just briefly touch on the information Anna circulated earlier in regards to making the process and people becoming interested parties when that goes forward?
Okay, so Chair, there's not a huge amount to say. I was going to do a summary note of that advice note, but actually the way it's written, I couldn't summarise it any more effectively than that. So the note that I've circulated is a public document. It's on the Planning Inspectorate's website. Anybody can register for updates on the Lower Thames Crossing application. So there is, if you go onto the National Infrastructure Planning website, and I'll circulate the link to members of the task force, there is a box where you can register for updates on the Lower Thames Crossing. So they will tell you if the application is submitted. They'll send you an email if it's accepted. The key thing for members of the task force to remember is that Highways England, if they submit their development consent order application on the 23rd of October, the Planning Inspectorate has 28 days to determine whether they're going to accept that application or not. In the meantime, the council will be asked for an adequacy of consultation response. So officers are working in the background on that document, ready to submit it, because we only get 14 days to submit it. But essentially, sometime in November, the date for registering as an interested party will open. Now, the council is a host authority, so we are automatically an interested party. But members of the public and members of the task force may want to register to be an interested party. And the guidance note that I circulated gives you all the information you need to be able to do that. You can't just register with your name and address. You've got to give some written representations and some justification as to why you object or support the scheme or otherwise. And that guidance note is very detailed. So I don't propose to add any more to it, other than if anybody's got any issues or need any support or help, then please to drop me an email, and I'm more than happy to provide them with some support and assistance on that. But it's unlikely, let's just look at the calendar, it's unlikely that the date for registering as an interested party will open before before the 20th of November, and you get 28 days to register. So it's towards the end of November. But as I've said, once the application's submitted, I've committed to providing a note on key dates. So I'll be more than happy to drop an email round to the task force members to tell them when the date for registering as an interested party and submitting written representations starts.
Brilliant, thank you for that. I think the dates would be really useful and help everyone to actually make sure they do things by the right dates and not miss any of them.
Chair, I think there's a wider piece as well, maybe, that you may want to you may want me to formulate an email for you to send around to all members, because obviously this isn't just members of the task force that are interested in this. This is a borough-wide issue. So you may want me to formulate an email for you to send out to all members, as you know, in your role as chair, to notify everybody, not just task force.
Thank you. I was planning on sending out to group leaders, but and the other independent. But yes, I think as all councillors have been in this chamber and had views and voted on how we feel about the Lower Thames Crossing, I think that would be good to go to all members. So thank you for that. Just going to see if there's any questions now online before going back to the chamber. Laura Blake online.
Thank you. I just wanted to jump back to those letters that residents have received from Highways England, if I may. Anna, I appreciate how busy you must be at the moment, and I have emailed you on this, but just to point out, it's not just that councillor as an individual case. I am aware of lots of residents who are not within development boundary that have had those letters. I assumed that it was because of the reasons that you told us. And I know that Highways England have told me, and admittedly this isn't Thurrock only, but they have sent out 1,800 of these letters evidently to residents along the entire route. So I think we may find that there are a lot of residents. So if any other councillors do come across it in their wards, it is very likely that people are getting the letters and they're not within the development boundary because of the reason that Anna explained.
So the other reason people who aren't in the development boundary will get letters is because they are within a certain distance of the road and they are entitled to what's called a Part 1 compensation claim up to a year after the road is open. So this relates to noise compensation claims and disturbance. So that's why a lot of people within a certain distance of the route have received letters as well. So there are a varying number of reasons why individuals would receive letters, frankly.
Yeah, these are not Part 1 claims. These are definitely where they're saying that they want the rights to the land interest. Unfortunately, I've noticed a lot of them are coming from Chapel St Mary in particular. There have been a lot in roads that are definitely not in or even adjacent to the development boundary.
I got one myself, referring to the subsoil in the road outside my house. Several of the houses along the road, they've all got them. So it's pretty widespread.
What we all need to remember, though, is that matters relating to individuals' property is a private law matter. It's not a public law matter, so it's not automatically something that the council can get involved in. It's a matter for the individuals to raise with Highways England, I'm afraid, and to seek their own advice on.
I entirely agree. I just mentioned it because just to share that it's pretty widespread. It's not just, there's many reasons why the letters are there.
I think just from what I've seen and heard, as whether it's Linford, Tilbury Town, Chapel St Mary, basically the same letter in different parts of the borough. So it seems that, I don't know, I could be wrong. It seems like this the kind of thing they sort of spray approach, send out to various properties sort of to cover themselves before submitting a DCO. That's how I personally view it.
The bottom line is on the scheme is that Highways England are and it's consistent with any consultation. You're better to over consult than under consult, because as soon as you under consult, you have an potential risk and impact on your application process. So Highways England will err on the side of caution in the same way that any promoter would, and make sure that they consult more people than they need to than less, frankly.
Anna, could I ask, does it make any difference that some of these people are getting the letters now after consultation has ended?
No, because it depends whether they received letters as part of the consultation before or not. If they're an affected party, some of the letters will give them an opportunity to comment on the application as it currently is. So if they're people that would have been consulted as part of statutory consultation, had statutory consultation being undertaken now, so that relates to people, for example, who have sold their property and new people have bought it, so they wouldn't have had the opportunity to comment on the application or proposed application previously. They will then be given a 28-day period minimum to provide written representations on the application process and design of the scheme. So Highways England has to continually update all of the property information that it holds within the red line boundary to make sure that it consults everybody that needs to be consulted or would have been consulted at statutory consultation.
So if they're getting these letters for the first time now as landowners for the rights, should they then be getting a chance to respond?
It depends. It depends, Laura. I've got no idea who these people are and where they are and what the impact on them is. So I can't possibly say what they should or shouldn't do because I don't know what the letters say and I'm not party to it. So I can't give that advice, I'm afraid. They need to seek their own advice, and if they're not sure, they need to ring Highways England. That's the only advice I can give you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Allen in the chamber.
Chair, if I could just sought some clarification in terms of the DCO, the Development Consent Order. 50 to 60,000 pages long, 28 days to examine, 14 days of which, half of that time, to oppose or to object to any area. And the question being on that, how many senior officers do we have and legal officers that will examine that paper, the 50 to 60,000 pages long, over the 28 days, and within half of that time period try to decipher through that and find any areas that do need opposing and objecting. How many officers do we have, Anna, senior officers like yourself and legal representatives that will sort through them papers?
Okay, Councillor Allen, it's not one person's task, I'm afraid, and it's unlikely that it's going to be council officers that are filtering through that information. It's more likely it's going to be the consultative team, because quite frankly, the officers in-house are already committed full-time on work. And if you think about our environmental health team and our public health team, who are already incredibly pressured because of the COVID pandemic, I would be terrified asking them to review paperwork for the DCO at this point in time. So the intention is that we've got a mirror team as part of our consultant group who will do the review, and that review will have to be carved up, because one person cannot review 50,000 pages of documentation. So it's not going to happen. What does happen, though, is that I've got Chris as my deputy, if you like, to help provide the coordination and input. Chris is obviously very familiar with the scheme because he's obviously worked for Highways England for some considerable time. He will be reporting into me, and I will then be making the recommendation upwards as to how we progress. But I'm afraid it won't be down to one individual to read that paper. And at this point in time, we've got barristers retained, a junior barrister and a Queen's Counsel retained to provide advice to the council. We're due to meet with them in the coming weeks to have a conversation about our approach on the scheme and how we're going to deal with it.
I'll just come back on that, Chair. In terms of commercial assets, is that what has been set aside for us to fight this, Anna? Is it the 4 million estimated cost that we've got to actually supply barristers and high court high court representatives to sort of fight this for us?
Well, we won't be going to the High Court, Councillor Allen. This process is an examination in public that's run by the Planning Inspectorate, and it doesn't last 28 days. The 28 days is the initial acceptance period for the application. So we need to review it to submit our written representations and an adequacy of consultation response. The examination itself is run over a 6-month period. So it will run for some considerable time, and there will be issue-specific hearings, and there'll be compulsory purchase hearings. There will be issue-specific hearings on things like air quality, construction impacts, the development consent order itself. And then there will be, at the end of that process, that 6-month process, then the examining authority gets given 3 months to submit its recommendation to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State gets 3 months to determine the application. So the examination process takes over a year. So the 28-day acceptance period and the initial review to submit the written representations is just the tip of the iceberg. And we've all been busy so far, but actually the process really starts when it moves into examination. So after acceptance, the next stage will be a preliminary meeting, which will be scheduled to be held. And that may take place over 1 or 2 days, and it is the conclusion of the preliminary meeting that starts the examination process for 6 months. So I didn't quite follow the point that you made about funding. Did you mention £4 million? If I had a £4 million budget, that'd be great. I don't know that we've got that much money.
Do you know how much we have got, sidelined to use if we so need it?
I know what I've got in my current budget that includes the Lower Thames Crossing budget as well as the members' wish list. Yes.
Would you indicate that amount to us, sir?
Oh, I'm told that I should be talking about budgets in a public forum, to be quite honest. That's maybe something we'll take offline.
I think that's fair. Has anyone else got any closing remarks or anything we haven't discussed already? Online, Wendy?
Yes, Chair. It's just that the way Anna's coming across to us is that I think Anna's trying to say that we need to accept this. It's coming, and we need to mitigate. And it's not until the way Anna's putting it across is that we do accept it, that we can find out basically how much we can hold our hand out for. in terms of, you mentioned like Section 106 monies or something like that. So until we actually, what you're saying, Anna, is till we actually accept it, we won't know what we're going to get from them as a result of any impact that it's going to cause for the next 100 years.
So, and it's an important point that you raised, Councillor Allen, but it's something I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you've heard me say all of this before. We've got a national policy statement that gives a presumption in favour of a policy compliance scheme. We've got a government who is undertaking planning reform and is committed to build. We've got the Department for Transport that's identified £29.4 billion for transport infrastructure and has created an acceleration unit for new infrastructure road schemes. And we've got the government referring to Lower Thames Crossing as a flagship scheme. We've got that against the backdrop of COVID-19 and a recession, and all fingers pointing to the need to bring forward public schemes and develop infrastructure. So when you consider that mix and the position that we're in with Lower Thames Crossing, on the basis they submit a policy compliant scheme, and we've still to see the scheme that they submit, so we don't know yet. But there is that presumption in favour of development. We've got a council motion to judicially review Highways England that's been standing for a while. Judicial review is not a silver bullet. You can only judicially review on certain grounds, and it has to be a decision that's made that you challenge, and that decision can only be challenged on irregularity, illegality or impropriety. So they're very narrow grounds for challenging. And actually all a judicial review does, it doesn't stop the scheme. All it does is remit a decision that was made with errors to be made again. And so the judicial review process isn't the silver bullet that perhaps some people think it is. So, if you're asking me my professional opinion on it all, it's really difficult because I've got a level of sympathy and understanding for the scheme and the impacts it's going to have on the borough. But actually, I come back to the analogy I use about the petulant child. We've all had petulant children.
I know you're on mute.
Did you miss all of that?
Up to the bit of child.
Petulant child. Petulant children. My kids have spent many a happy hour sat on time out on the bottom stair when they've been naughty, and I ignore them when they've been naughty, because, that's what you do so that they learn their lesson. There's an element for me that if we carry on digging our heels in on something that has got so much support nationally, are Highways England going to play with us and give us what we want when we're saying no? And is there a time now to start thinking, right, our opportunity to influence is diminished considerably now we're at application stage. Is now the time to start thinking, right, let's sit back for a minute and look at what are the benefits that we could get from this scheme for our borough in terms of the social value, in terms of the jobs, in terms of, we want £1 million out of every £2 million spent in our borough because that helps our local economy. We want the workers for the scheme to be housed somewhere in the borough because if they are, they're supporting the local economy by eating out in the restaurants, by spending money in the shops and by paying money for rent in properties. You've got to start maybe having a think about how the approach that the council has towards the scheme can actually lever and harness more benefits than impacts. So I'm throwing that out there. Obviously, it's got to be a member decision, but now is really the point where we have to really reflect carefully on how we move forward with this, because if we're going to change our stance a little bit and be a little bit more conciliatory with Highways England to negotiate those benefits and secure them, then there's potentially more opportunity to engage in the examination process in a slightly different way. It's going to cost money, whatever we do, because we need the legal support, we need the technical support. We still need to challenge and review Highways England because this isn't about rolling over and giving up, far from it. But actually, if we're responding to the process, responding to Highways England's case and then fighting our own case, we are fighting a case on three fronts, and that is going to be costly and resource intensive.
Yeah. Thank you for that response, and I eagerly await any challenges, but I very much doubt that there'll be many challenges. In all honesty, I think it's just a matter of rolling over, having our bellies rubbed, accepting it, and holding our hand out at the end of the day to see what we can get from this. Great suggestion that £1 million from every £2 million sourced for our borough. That would be absolutely brilliant, and I could only hope that we get anything like that, Anna.
But it's not going to come at no cost, is it? Because Highways England are going to want a change in position to support those things. Why should Highways England give us anything if we're going to oppose the scheme? That's the question we've got to ask ourselves.
With so much, Chair, going into the coffers, 29.4 billion in transport infrastructure, and they haven't even considered putting a link across, a rail link across. You've still got to go into London, I understand, to get south of the river, and they've not even looked at putting a railway crossing across in it.
They did look at multimodal use of the tunnel, but way back in the early options appraisal process, because I raised that issue when I first arrived on the job here, which would have been June 2018, and I got a response from Highways England that said they considered it back in 2014 or something ridiculous like that. So they have considered it, but they haven't considered it recently.
Is there any chance of having that put back on these?
Not now.
No?
Thank you for that. Quite aware of the time is ticking on. So unless anyone's got any literally last closing remarks, anyone online? Councillor Muldowney?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to pick up again from what Anna was just saying there, I just wondered, Anna, what would we be doing differently if we made this shift that you're talking about from opposing the crossing to being more conciliatory? Would that be no judicial review? What would it actually look like? Just so we've got some clarity about that for the people at home who might be watching.
Yeah, the motion about judicial review is something that still stands, and it's something that we would consider at any relevant time. But it's important to note now that any judicial review wouldn't be of Highways England going forward. It would be of the Planning Inspectorate and the Secretary of State, actually, because that's the realms of where we're moving to now in terms of the process. So that may be something. I mean, don't get me wrong. If there's been illegality, impropriety, or errors in the procedure, then of course it's only right that a public authority is brought to account for any mistakes that it makes. So that's a slightly separate kind of issue, really. The issue that you make about changing our position, if we were to change our position or be more conciliatory, it's not about rolling over, because even if we were supporting the scheme now, there would be elements about that scheme that we are not happy with, because nobody is ever going to be 100% happy with the scheme as submitted. So it's not about rolling over. It is about identifying what our top 12 asks are of Highways England in terms of mitigation and what gives us the maximum benefit for our residents and our borough. And in exchange for that, we potentially don't present a case that seeks to prevent the scheme, because, as we've said, it's, that's a big ask and very resource intensive and very expensive, and potentially, least likely to succeed. Let's be honest about that. That's the advice we've had from our barrister, that it's unlikely we would be successful. It's more about negotiation of securing the benefits, still having the argument about those elements that we're not happy about. So the ongoing air quality monitoring, for example, the ongoing noise monitoring, picking those key things. There might be some elements around the health impact assessment work that we're not happy with their response. So we want that in an enhanced level in relation to particular things, such as, you know, community severance or whatever it may be. So it's still about but it's about choosing our fight and being a bit more strategic about the fight.
And just a very final question, just to ask. I mean, really, as you say, this task force group hasn't got any powers to have the council do one thing or another. I mean, does it matter? Does it matter what we think here in terms of the council's position?
I think it does matter. I think as a collective, the committee has had a greater level of information discussed and seen here than has potentially been to other committees in the council. Obviously, the chair provides a quarterly update report to Cabinet on the work of the task force. So it's not that the administration isn't kept in touch and up to date with things that's going on. Obviously, we have portfolio holder briefings to talk about the emerging scheme and things that are coming through. So it's not that various parties aren't kept in touch as such, but I do think the work of the task force is important, but I do think that we need to think about how it's going to work going forward to maximise the impact. And I think it's also quite difficult because, you know, although the task force is made up of cross-party representatives and we've got some community representatives and business representatives as well, you know, the next phase of the process that we're entering into is very much more formal and very much more statutory based and regulation based. And so we've got a role as a local authority to play in relation to that that's maybe slightly different to the interests of some of the people that sit on the task force. And that's why I feel potentially that task and finish groups where we can talk about specific topics and specific issues may be beneficial going forward.
Happy with that, Councillor Muldoon?
I'm not sure if I'd use the word happy, but thank you for your answer, Anna.
Councillor Shinnick in the chamber.
So it's basically, I do think personally myself, we need to start working with Highways England to get the best deal, you know, for the borough, because at the moment we're working against them and it seems that we're not getting much out of it all, are we? And I think if we started working with them, it might work better for us.
I think
it's got to be a matter that members consider, hasn't it? It's a member decision, essentially. It's a full council decision that resolved to oppose the scheme unanimously and object in principle. So therefore, you know, there needs to be a conversation about how, you know, what the mechanism is and the governance process is to potentially consider another paper at council, maybe about where we are and what the options are going forward.
Just to add a point, really, Chair, I think it just comes down to compensatory measures of mitigation. Is how much are they prepared to give this borough for the impact they're about to have on it?
I think, yeah, a lot of that's obviously what we talked about earlier as well in the meeting. So there's conversations to be had and things have got to be moved forward. And I think getting a few nods in the chamber, really, I think everyone knows that direction that's got to go in. We can't always just be saying no to everything. We've got to pick and choose our battles, I'd say, probably the best way to describe it, and get maximum benefit that we can for the borough and mitigation. I can't see anyone with their hands up in the chamber. Don't think there's anyone online. So I think that concludes the business of the meeting now. It is now 19:50 p.m. Declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much for your time, everyone, and a safe journey home and stay safe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.